but there's something about the depth of thought for me in a lot of these works that is really precious. But initially, the Stations of the Cross were part of 13th century discipline of St. Francis. St. Francis got the idea that if we put up these stations, stopping places in churches, people could, as part of their Lenten discipline, walk the journey that Jesus walked and make that into prayer. For me, in making that journey and praying in that way, I discovered that the Stations of the Cross, at least for me, and this is the commentary that I've given the artists, is about an existential journey. How do I live this life when I learn that I'm mortal and I will die? And I think that's what this whole journey is about. Station number 4, Jesus meets his mother on the road. This is a work by Fiona White, who won the Social Justice Award in the Blake Prize last year. It is confronting, and it's sort of peculiar to me that in the church, if somebody was bashing nails into somebody's body and blood pouring out, we'd say that's acceptable. Torture, murder, that's okay to depict. But a mother on the road looking at her son who's being taken to be crucified, pointing to the groin from which, or to a womb, as it were, from where her child has been birthed, and holding her breast at which her child has fed, and looking with these extraordinary eyes at what's going on. I'm confronted by that, but not in an offensive way. This is station number 8. It's the station in the text, a hard, tough text about Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. When he meets the women of Jerusalem, there's a sense of saying, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves, which I think is to push back a reflective statement. Alan Jones is the artist. He's given us this self-portrait, which is difficult to do. It's about looking at himself and reflecting about who he is in his journey. And it's got all these sort of dots on it, which have come out of the use of his fingers. And then he's painted over them, he painted them in white paint, but then painted the tones so that they move gently. And I get the sense when I look at this painting that it's about trying to touch himself in the sense of knowing who he is in this mortal journey. It's a really strong painting. Station number 10, Jesus is stripped. And in my reading of these stations, that's the vulnerability of being human. In this mortal journey, there's so much that strips me. So the painting is by, or the paintings, because there are half a dozen, are by Mary Ann Coates. They are watercolours, and she's working from images that she's found in the press. She paints vibrant, vivid colour, and she's given us these boats that are like refugee boats, tossed on the water, and extraordinarily vulnerable in the vastness of the ocean. And there's some sense when you look at it, if you take the time, you realise that's me in the journey of life. And I'm that vulnerable and that open to being stripped by whatever happens. Ewan MacLeod's painting is the station number 11. Jesus is nailed to the cross. And he's given us a figure, himself, lying flat on his back in the snow. He has a lovely story that goes with it. He said he's not a very good skier. He went up the top of Mount Cook with guys in a plane, and they had big heavy things on their back and their front and were to ski down. In short, a 20-minute skiing exercise became 5.5 hours. He fell lots of times, and by the time he got to the bottom, he was absolutely exhausted and couldn't get out of the snow. So he's drawn this image of himself flat on his back and being looked at whimsically by penguins who are a bit like Gulliver's Lilliputian figures, and these tiny figures just looking on with a bemused, not going to do anything, but we're just interested to see what happens. And it is that sense of, I guess there's a sense of, do I give up at some point? Is death about that? This is Cathy O'Donnell's work. It's station number 14, Jesus is laid in the tomb. And what she's done is take a figure, she works with charcoal, It moves from light to dark, and it's as though the feet on this table, and the table could reflect a cross, beautifully draped with a cloth. I think the way in which the feet reflect the nails of the cross and the way in which they're exposed is a lot like the things happening when we get pictures of war dead, people killed in tsunamis or cyclones, in other natural disasters. The thing that happens in the press is they show us their feet or their hands sticking out from something, and that's in a way what you've got in this figure. It's not traditional to have the resurrection works, but since this is an Easter show, part of my Protestantism is to want to have a story about the resurrection. David Usher is the artist. He's a potter and painter, and he'd grown up as a Christian person in a Pentecostal community, and he wanted to paint an image that would be about uplift. And as I understood him, he was struggling with the question of what's between the flesh of this body and the spirit of some life that might be afterwards. So he painted a small triptych, and I like the part of this triptych where it's small. Initially I wondered about that, and I thought, Christians are all so loud about resurrection. It's like if we shout louder, make louder music, that the resurrection must be real. But in the days when Jesus was raised, and in some of the things today, perhaps resurrection is tentative, slow, uncertain, and to be struggled with before it finally finds its form. And he gave us then another work, which is a work on wood. It's more confident in itself, and it's a painting of uplift. And I think a painting that is somewhere struggling with this flesh-spirit thing. The joy has been to ask artists, people outside not of the faith tradition, to take some of the texts that are part of the tradition of the Christian faith and give them back to us in the way they want it. I think for so long, theologians, of which I'm one, have controlled the text. You can have our text if you read it this way. The excitement is when people give us back our text in fresh ways, and you say, yeah, I never saw that, I never knew that, that's lively, that helps me. So I delight in that. I delight in the conversations I've had with artists along the way who tell me, this has reshaped my thinking about being an artist or about life itself. I just rejoice in the energy that happens through this, and I rejoice with the congregation of people who realise that this is a way of saying something about what's important to them to people in a wider world.